Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishavamsha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paridana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamstra. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavari Paschata Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, welcome to our continued study of this most wonderful Bhagavad Gita. Today we begin chapter 12. Very sweet chapter. And chapter 12 is entitled Devotional Service. So we'll begin here with the first verse of chapter 12, which reads, one second. Arjuna inquired, which are considered to be more perfect, those who are always properly engaged in a devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested? So, why is Arjuna asking this question now is interesting. We know Arjuna asks often for many reasons. Because Krishna has already explained, starting in the second chapter, but also directly in the 6th chapter, 8th chapter, and certainly 9th chapter, and even the last 2 verses of the 11th chapter, about what is best and how pure devotional service, ananya bhakti, right? At the end of 6th chapter, he said the highest of all yogis is the devotee, the bhakta. In the 8th chapter, he said, just think of me and you'll go back to the Supreme. Certainly in, patram pushpam phalam toyam and manmana bhava mad bhakto. So he keeps repeating over and over again. And in the last 2 verses of chapter 11, Krishna has very specifically said only by undivided bhakti can he be understood. And then he explained how to even do pure devotional service at the end of the 11th chapter in the 55th verse. So why is Arjuna asking this question is very important, and we'll discuss. So because even after reading the last 2 verses, still people may be attached to the impersonal path. So Arjuna wants Krishna to declare it very boldly and explicitly, clearly, directly what is best. There are different ways to realize the absolute truth. There is an impersonal path, as we'll discuss in a couple verses. But Arjuna wants to know which is the highest and most perfect of all, and which is the easiest. So the highest or most perfect path and the easiest path. So Arjuna is asking, which is that one? The second thing that Arjuna is looking to confirm, so he has seen the universal form, he has seen the four-handed form, and now his original two-handed form of Krishna. And Arjuna doesn't want us to be filled with this awe and reverence that may shake the mood of pure devotional service. And Prabhupada comments in the purport of the first verse that Arjuna also wants to secure his own position of his feeling that Krishna is the supreme and bhakti is best, over the worship of the universal form or of the impersonal Brahman. He wants to confirm that Arjuna's current feeling of bhakti being the best is certainly the most powerful and superior process. So to reaffirm his own feeling, because he is very attached, as we saw, to the personal feature, particularly the two-armed feature. And so for that reason, he is asking this. Right? He also wants to reinforce directly that bhakti is the superior process to jnana yoga. So Krishna has said already that bhakti is the highest of all, but hasn't made the direct comparison. And so this is maybe a little bit of belt and suspenders approach, we call it. To leave no shadow of a doubt, he is asking this. And then, Arjuna was disturbed, and so now he wants to hear something very sweet. When we get a little bit shaken, a little bit frightened, hearing something very sweet is nice, and we try to do it. Just like if we eat something spicy, then we have to eat something sweet afterwards. Similarly, Arjuna, having seen this very ferocious form, wants to know something sweet. And so we'll see some great nectar in this chapter, particularly the last section of verses. Very, very nice. So this chapter 12, Krishna is now going to speak and glorify the devotional service. And at the end, the very sweet qualities of bhakti that make a devotee very dear to Krishna. So this 12th chapter, being the last chapter of this middle section. We talked earlier, the middle section of Bhagavad Gita is like the crown jewel, because it speaks about bhakti. And so Krishna is going to end this crown jewel section of the Bhagavad Gita with some very, very sweet verses. And so we'll discuss this over the coming 3 weeks. So that is a little bit about the reason of why Arjuna was asking. So in the purport, Prabhupada describes that there are two types of impersonalists. And he says whether the impersonal manifestation either in this material world or in the spiritual world. So there are two types of impersonalists. There are two forms, actually. There's a universal form that is an impersonal type feature. Prabhupada, in another part of Srimad Bhagavatam, speaks about this as the pantheists. Because the worship of the Vishwarupa is so multifaceted, so many heads, so many arms, so many limbs. It has an impersonal feature because, with that, you cannot have a one-to-one relationship. Where do you look for your relationship? So you can simply have, kind of an impersonal awe and reverence. Though it's a form, it's too large to have a relationship. So it is an impersonal form of worship. And then we have, of course, the monists, who we, certainly speak about more frequently in the impersonal realm. Those who worship the effulgence, the Brahma Jyotir. And that Brahma Jyotir, of course, is present in the spiritual world. So the Vishwarup is present in the material world, and the Brahma Jyotir is present in the spiritual world. And thus Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that the impersonal manifestation, meaning there's two manifestations of impersonal, either in the material world, that's the Vishwarupa, or in the spiritual world, that is the Brahma Jyotir. So there's two types of worshippers. And Prabhupada writes, what is a personalist and what is an impersonalist? So a personalist is one who engages himself, all their energy, in the service of Krishna. And we're going to see it is the most direct and easiest means to realize the absolute truth. And what is an impersonalist? One engages one's energy in the meditation on the effulgence, indirectly, worshiping Krishna. So it's an indirect process. So one engages himself, but one in the service of Krishna and the other in meditation, particularly on the Brahmajyotir. So those are the two paths that we'll discuss. And the punchline Krishna is going to establish very clearly and directly that the distinction between impersonal and personal conceptions of the absolute truth, Krishna is going to explain that bhakti is one, the highest of all processes, two, the most direct process, and three, the easiest process. So Krishna is going to explain this very directly, and we'll see it immediately in this next verse. So, in verse 2, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Those who fix their minds on my personal form and are always engaged in worshiping me with great and transcendental faith are considered by me to be most perfect." So, here Krishna leaves no room for anything else to be. So there are three aspects of this verse we'll see. First, Krishna gives a very clear and direct instruction that bhakti is best. He says it is most perfect. So nothing can be more perfect than most perfect. So one who worships the personal form of Krishna is the best. And that has been established here. He also established it at the end of the 6th chapter, but here a little bit more directly. He adds a couple of commentaries. He says, Nitya Yukta, always engaged. So the process that is most perfect is one who is always engaged, constantly, without wasting even 1 millisecond in any other activity. And this continuous involvement we've seen over and over again, from the 22nd verse of the 9th chapter, one who is undeviating in their devotional service, I carry what they lack, preserve what they have. We've seen this before, and this, continuous. So why? Well, just as, you cannot be in two boats at one time. You cannot have one foot in one boat and another foot in another. Because if you do, more than likely you're going to end up in neither boat and end up in the water. Similarly, we have to make a decision. Are we going to serve Krishna, or are we going to serve Maya and the illusory sense objects? That's it. Our choice. Am I going to serve my senses, or am I going to serve Krishna? So we have to make a decision. So there's not an idea of balance. I'm going to balance my material and spiritual life. No. The key is to make everything 100% engaged in spiritual life, right? So we've been discussing that, and so the important, most perfect process means one has no material sense desires, and will not waste even a fraction of a second on anything else, because each second is so valuable, so wonderful, and such an opportunity to render service, that one is Nitya Yukta, always engaged. So this is pure devotee. They find everything else very useless. So the third aspect of this verse is very important. Krishna says, with great and transcendental faith. So we must have faith, not just ritualistic surrender or surrender out of fear, but we should have faith. And this faith, it builds surrender and love. Right? With faith in Krishna, we no longer hold on to what if and what about. We just surrender. We know Krishna will manage everything perfectly. Srila Prabhupada boarded the boat of Jaladuta and crossed an ocean. He didn't wonder, what if I run out of money? What if I don't know what to do? Or what about my food? What about no worry? He just had faith in Krishna, and he was able to surrender. So this faith is very important, because with faith, then one can very quickly surrender. Prabhupada had so much faith, he would, submit offers to purchase temples without even the money in hand. And he knew Krishna would arrange it somehow, if he wanted it to. So he was bold, but not confidence in his own powers, but faith in Krishna and the power of Guru. So this faith is very important. And we should have faith in two things. One, that this process of bhakti is the only path that will give me perfection of life, complete happiness. Nothing else will do. And thus, one can be Nitya Yukta. So we should have faith in that. Bhakti is the only thing. And two, Krishna is the only worshipable object, the only object of my affection. And his mercy will come. So if we have faith in these two things, then this surrender happens, this love is fulfilled, and one becomes Nitya Yukta, singularly engaged. So a very important process, and Krishna has established the most perfect process. But he's not going to leave it there. Now Krishna is going to speak about the impersonal process and what makes that challenging and less perfect. So not only is he going to say bhakti is most perfect, now he's directly going to establish that the impersonal path is less perfect. So he's speaking on both sides of it to make sure that we have perfect understanding to complete the circle. Because he's also said previously, bhakti is best. But now we're going to get the rest of the story. Okay? Verses 3-4. But those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed, and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such person engaged in the welfare of all, at last achieve me. So what is the result? Arjuna wonders for the impersonalist. So let's first discuss now what is the process that the impersonalist follows, because this leads us to understand what is best. It is a process that requires great control of the senses, right? Respectful to all, seeing everyone as part and parcel. There's this equanimity that exists, right? Prabhupada writes in the purport, often there is much penance involved before one fully surrenders to him. So this is a process full of penance. So what is the result of this process? One ultimately achieves Krishna. Krishna says, at last achieves me. So at last implies and infers that it's a long process. And we'll see this again in the next verses. So the process ultimately leads to Krishna. So one has to approach Krishna ultimately, no matter what process one takes, the personal or impersonal. The impersonal ultimately must come to Krishna. The personal certainly starts there. So is this Krishna that one achieves, is it the same as bhakti? No. It is the effulgence. It's one of his features. So one way we say it's non-different. But it is not the complete realization of Krishna. It is a partial realization. Right? So it's the in one way the same, but it is it is in one sense the same, but in the other sense it is a lower destination. Right? So why is the impersonal path lower? Because one, it's a very difficult process. One does not get to enjoy their senses. They have to control their senses, intense meditation. Right? Much penance, as Prabhupada said, is required. And two, it takes a long time. Right? It's the elevator versus stairs approach. How to get to the top of a building. This process, the impersonal process, is a very long approach. Many births are needed to progress. And ultimately, you need the association and mercy of a devotee to make progress to come to the point of knowing Krishna. So, the end of the impersonal path is where the personal path begins. And to get to that end, it requires the mercy of a great devotee. Otherwise, one may get stuck or lost. So same in the sense that it'll end at the same spot, Krishna, but it's inferior because it's very difficult and long process with many risks along the way. So that is why this impersonal process, Krishna is saying, is, again, he's going to talk about it, is less perfect. So in one way, yes, same result, but a very different journey. Just like getting to the top of a building by the elevator or stairs. Ultimately the same result, but very different journey. One is very easy and direct. One is very arduous and long and indirect. So this is the understanding. So now we'll see Krishna's continued discussion now, a little bit more explanation. For those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested, impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. So now Krishna is explaining that it's very troublesome. And he says it's always difficult. So one process is easy, one process is difficult. Then which is better? Very clear. No ambiguity. Right? So Krishna is now going to explain his own reasons of why bhakti is superior. Though the result ultimately may be the same, he's going to explain why bhakti is superior. One may say, if the result is the same, who cares? Right? But there will be no ambiguity after that we discuss this verse. So it's very clearly stated. First, advancement is very troublesome, difficult for the embodied. So one who has a body, this impersonal path is very difficult. First of all, the body itself needs so many things. But the impersonal path requires one to, engage in intense meditation and ignore the needs of the body. But when we have a body, there's going to be, my leg fell asleep, I'm hungry, I'm sleepy, my back hurts, I can't sit straight. All these things that are required to perform this very intense meditation, just being embodied, having a form, makes it very difficult. And having a form, and having a form for so long, it makes it difficult to meditate on something formless. Right? To meditate on light, when we ourselves have had a form since time immemorial, is not so easy. It's easier for us to meditate on Krishna's form, his curly hair, his beautiful cheeks, his beautiful eyes, his smile, because we can relate to those features. Right? So because we have a form, we're embodied in this form, the personal path, the meditation, makes it easier because we can relate to it. Right? Even thinking of Krishna's form is difficult, like we experience in chanting our japa. But that is at least easier than trying to fix the mind on something impersonal. Right? So the one reason Krishna says that this is difficult is because of us being embodied. So that is one. But why else is the impersonal process hard? There are more reasons. Well, the soul is active. That is the nature of the soul. So it's very difficult to be inactive. The senses always are wanting some engagement. And if we try to restrict them artificially, we may do so for some time, but ultimately we'll succumb to the desires of the senses. So bhakti is the more natural process because it allows the senses to be active, which is the natural state of the senses to be active, but it allows them to be active in a productive way, in a positive way. So this active engagement of the senses is far superior to the inactive detachment, because that goes in line with the nature of the soul. The impersonalists, they have no activity to engage the senses. They simply have to stop them. And they have to, withdraw, as we saw in the 6th chapter, the senses. Right? Similar process. Again, that is a process trying to meditate on the Paramatma, so it's not an impersonal feature. But this process, one has to follow that similar withdrawal of the senses. And have to sit and meditate on not even the pastimes or the beautiful bhajans or qualities of the Lord. No, just on light. And thus it becomes very difficult. Prabhupada talks in the purport, devotees are able to offer obeisances, singing and dancing and feasting, smelling. So much to attract our senses. But here, no activity. Because if the spiritual, the impersonals, there's no engagement for the senses because they don't focus on the form of Krishna. So the only thing they can engage their senses in is matter. Either they stop the senses or they engage them in matter. There's no positive engagement because they're not focused on the form of Krishna. Right? Whereas the devotees are able to, again, offer obeisances, chanting, dancing. Right? And finally, this impersonal path, because there's no activity, the satisfaction is not fulfilled. Just floating in the effulgence, yes, that may provide some satisfaction for a small amount of time, but ultimately we'll want some activity, some engagement. It's just like, floating on a small raft in the middle of a lake. Yes, that might be nice and relaxing for an hour, maybe 2. But after 6-8 hours, we'll want to get off. We'll want to go do something. Just lying in a raft in the middle of a lake, staring at the blue sky, that is like the best, example we can think of for this impersonal experience. Yes, it may be fulfilling for some amount of time, but ultimately we'll want to do something, some activity, because that is the nature of each of us as a spirit soul. Okay? So it doesn't create lasting fulfillment, and Prabhupada always talks about, even if one achieves that state, ultimately due to want of some activity, they fall back to the material conception. Okay? So, and finally, this troublesome nature is the impersonalist path is very difficult on the mind and senses. It's very difficult. To control those mind and senses in an inactive state, it's very hard. It can become very restless. And so if we compare or contrast that to the personalist worshipper, it's very easy to be 100% engaged in bhakti because one gets to use all their senses in service of Krishna. And Prabhupada gives so many nice examples in the purport. One can cook for Krishna, one can chant, one can sing, see the beautiful forms, honor prasadam, smell the flowers. There's so much activity one can do. And so this personal form is very powerful. Now one may ask, well, we are in a conditioned state. How do we worship Krishna personally when Krishna is in the spiritual world? And Prabhupada gives us that we worship the deity, the Archa Vigraha. That is a way in which we worship Krishna personally. And Prabhupada gives, the example of the mailbox to help us understand how that the deity of Krishna is empowered and actually is non-different from the Supreme Lord himself, because Krishna has authorized, has empowered the deity to be the recipient of our service. And Prabhupada gives the example of the mailbox. If you put a letter in a mailbox, because that mailbox is authorized and sanctioned by the administration, it has the ability to then ultimately lead to that letter being delivered some far place away. But if you drop a letter in some random box, it'll have no effect. Similarly, yes, the deity may be made of marble or stone, but because it has been empowered, Krishna has entered that marble or stone, it is now fully potent to receive our service. It has the full potency to accept our service directly. And thus, Krishna can personally be present in the temple and in our homes in this Archa Vigraha form. And that is why Srila Prabhupada so wonderfully and enthusiastically encouraged this Archa Vigraha worship. It is a very important process for us to engage in this personal and direct worship of Krishna. So, we see many reasons why the personalist path is superior to the impersonalist. The advancement is easier. It's not as arduous. One gets to engage their senses. Because we have a form, it's easier to meditate on a form. So many reasons. But there's more. The biggest disadvantage of the impersonal path is one doesn't get the direct mercy or assistance of Krishna to make progress. There's no partiality, as we saw in chapter 9. Right? So in the personal path, one gets the direct assistance, mercy of Krishna. And once we start the impersonal path, it can sometimes become very difficult to break the attachment to that impersonal, and it leads to an atheistic view, denying the form of Krishna. And that's where it becomes very dangerous. Because to make the transition from the impersonal path to the personal path, one needs the mercy of a pure devotee. On one's own, it will not happen. Some have done it. We have the example of, great, like Shukadev Goswami. The four Kumaras. So there have been some great examples. But they had the great fortune of some very powerful association that enabled that to happen. So Krishna is saying very clearly what is most perfect. And Prabhupada in this chapter, in this purport, over and over and over again, and you can see the love he has. He keeps saying, never do it. There's too much risk in the impersonal process. You may never reach the goal. Due to this uncertainty, don't do it. Take the certain path of bhakti. He spends so much time in this purport trying to protect us. Just like if one knows that there is danger out there, one out of love will repeatedly encourage, be careful, be careful, be careful. So in this purport, it's worth reading again if you didn't note that. Prabhupada is very wonderfully saying, don't take this path, it's very dangerous, it's risky. Hear what Krishna is saying. So as a father will guide, Prabhupada is guiding us very nicely. So now, the final verse of this section, very, very sweet verse. It's 2 verses. We see the conclusion of Krishna's comparison. So he said it's most perfect, the personal path, in the 2nd verse. Then he explained why and how it is most perfect. And now he's going to, we can say put the nail in the coffin or the final icing on the cake with this beautiful verse. But those who worship me, giving up all their activities unto me, and being devoted to me without deviation, engage in devotional service, and always meditating upon me, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Pritha, for them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. So here Krishna says, we can only know Krishna by devotional service. That is the only way. We have understood that. But here Krishna is saying that he personally comes to uplift the devotee from the ocean of suffering. The devotee doesn't even need to endeavor for liberation. Doesn't ask, doesn't care about escaping the cycle of birth and death or this ocean of material misery. Right? We see in Shikshashtakam, Janmani Janmani Shure. Birth after birth is the prayer of the pure devotee. They don't even have to ask for freedom. Why? Because Krishna will be the swift deliverer. The devotee only has one goal: pleasing Krishna. Not even their own salvation. Their only goal is to please Krishna. And that devotee, Krishna personally comes and takes them home, back to God. And so this mood of devotion we see so wonderfully in the pure devotees. You know, one of my favorite examples of this is in the pastime of Gopastami. You know, Subal, the great cowherd boy, on this very momentous day of Krishna having the first opportunity to go graze the cows deep into the forest, away from, you know, all the supervision, the big day. And Subal gave up that opportunity for the purpose of allowing Srimati Radharani to join that festivity. But why Subal did that? Because he knew what would please Krishna more. His own presence, yes, would please Krishna somewhat. But Srimati Radharani's presence would please Krishna more. And so he gave up his own enjoyment, his own opportunity for the pleasure of Krishna. That is the mood of the pure devotee. Singularly focused on Krishna's pleasure. And what does Krishna do in reciprocation? He is the swift deliverer. He comes personally, how? On Garuda, and picks them up. You know, imagine you had an invitation to go see the president of the country or the king. Best case, you'll get some invitation. But are they going to come and pick you up? No. They may arrange someone to come and pick you up, but they'll not come and pick you up. Krishna is saying, I'm personally coming. He's not sending some Garuda or some other plane. He's saying, I am the swift deliverer. So there is no need to endeavor on one's own. Prabhupada writes, one doesn't need to endeavor to try to move the soul to the spiritual world. You know, this Ashtanga yoga process or any other yoga. No one needs to try to put. Krishna will take that responsibility. Just serve Krishna. So one, Prabhupada quotes at the end of this purport, this very famous verse, Sarvadhamam Parityaja, that one should abandon all other processes. Just surrender to Krishna. Don't even worry about your sinful reactions. Just have faith. Just as a child has full faith in the Father protecting and providing, have faith. Krishna will provide and protect everything. And how long does it take, Krishna says? He says, I am the swift deliverer. Swift. That means quickly. Not after a long time. The personal path, right? He said, at last achieves me. But here, Krishna is saying, I am the swift deliverer. It's a very, very sweet verse. And these two verses combine. So verse 6 gives us the requirements or the prerequisites to achieve this great mercy of Krishna who personally comes. When does he personally come? When all the activities are focused on Krishna, pure devotional service. The mind is fixed on Krishna, not fixed on, some party, Facebook, football. Fixed on Krishna. This pure devotional service. When one is in this mode, what happens? We see in verse 7, I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. One doesn't even have to be a great swimmer. Krishna himself will come and uplift us. Right? We know no matter how good of a swimmer we are, we can't save ourselves. But even if we are the worst of swimmers, Krishna will come if we are fixed in His pure bhakti. He'll help us escape. And what are we supposed to do? Just chant the holy names of the Lord very sincerely. Sing the glories of the Lord. Render practical service. Honor prasadam. Prabhupada writes in the purport, I wanted to read, that the process is very simple. Wow. The process is very simple, he says. One can devote himself in his occupation and engage at the same time in chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So he says, one can engage themselves in their occupation and at the same time chant the holy names of the Lord. And the result of that relatively simple process, attaining the direct mercy of Krishna. And so our main responsibility, cultivate devotion, bhakti, this eagerness to serve, and this will attract the Supreme Lord's attention. So, as we saw already in this 8th chapter, only bhakti, only Ananya bhakti can lead one to the supreme destination. That was the 22nd verse. And here we see the result. So Krishna has established, without a doubt, very clearly the most perfect process of personal worship, and why impersonal worship is not recommended, because it is very dangerous, fraught with risk, very long, very difficult, whereas the personal process is very sweet, sublime, and simple, and it attracts ultimately the direct mercy of Krishna. He is coming, and He'll pick all of His devotees up. So just chant nicely and render service and let Krishna's plan unfold very sweetly. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Now this is the first 7 verses. Any questions or comments on today's verses? Hare Krishna, Dhanwad. It's a little bit faint. I'm not hearing so clear.
Thank you, Prabhu. Very nice class. Very great description of all this stuff. I got some kind of 2 questions. The first one is like the impersonals, they do not believe on the personal form of the Lord, and they do worship as a devotees. So they say, okay, we do all for pleasing the Lord. So even though he is impersonal, he is completely unconceivable, and he is all pervading, and he has all strength, and they believe on him completely. But they don't, they completely disagree with existing as a personal form. So they worship as a devotee. They do not worship as kind of independent of Lord. They worship as a devotee of the Lord. So do Krishna help them in that?
So it depends. You added one statement there that would determine what the fate is of the impersonalist. And I'm glad you brought this question up, because it's a very important distinction. So if one is worshiping the impersonal feature of the Lord, but not denying the personal feature of the Lord, then there is hope for one to progress and be saved. But if one may understand, I realize Krishna's Brahma Jyotir feature. That is my stage of realization. Well, from there one can progress. But if one is worshiping the impersonal and at the same time denying the presence of the personal feature of the Lord, then that becomes offensive. Because if somebody denies your presence, that is offensive. Right? You're saying you don't exist. No, I exist. So as long as one's impersonal worship doesn't come to the offensive state where they explicitly say, no, there is no personal feature, then there is hope that one will progress. Because the impersonalist worshiper who denies the existence of the personal form, there's a purpose they deny it. Because ultimately they want to become God. They want to merge into the Supreme and become God. So to facilitate that desire, they must object to the personal, because you cannot merge into the person of God, right? So and the reason your question is so important is because sometimes we, completely reject and maybe discriminate all impersonal worshipers. There are some innocent impersonal worshipers who have not yet come to realize the other stages, the Paramatma realization and Bhagavan realization. Well, for them, yes, by the mercy of a pure devotee, they may continue to progress to expand their understanding. But for the devout impersonalist who says, no, there is no personal feature, then who can help them? Because they have understood on their own, in their own mind, conclusively something, and they'll never seek Krishna's help, so it will not happen. Right? So it depends on which aspect of impersonal worship one is to determine whether there's hope for them to progress. And so when Prabhupada is commenting very directly and strongly about the impersonalist view and how one should be very careful of this Mayavadi philosophy, it is of the second nature, the one who denies the personal feature of the Lord, not the innocent who has not yet understood the next levels. Okay? Is that okay, Prabhu?
Yes, perfect. I got one more question. Is in chapter 15, Krishna says that the abode of mind is like whoever goes to that abode, no one becomes that. In chapter 15, Krishna says Saddama Paramama. So
Yeah.
with respect to that, I just had a question. So like, how do we understand that the Dhamma what Krishna mentioning in chapter 15 is the Goloka Vrindavan? So where is that link within the Bhagavad Gita?
So when Krishna speaks about the spiritual world, remember there are two different realms within the spiritual world. There are the Vaikuntha Lokas and ultimately Goloka Vrindavan or Krishna Loka. And when Krishna himself is speaking, one achieves my eternal abode. Well, Krishna is saying my abode. Just like if I say, you please come to my house. Well, you know where my house is. Right? So I don't have to say, please come to, 45 Maywood. No, it's come to my house. So Krishna has said, come to my abode by worshiping me, by fixing your mind upon me, right? So he's, again, in a conversation with Arjuna, and that is the direct link. But we know within the spiritual world, there's also the abode of the four-armed form of Krishna, in his form of Narayan. And so he is also present there. So that's where we understand. And so when he speaks in the 15th chapter, my abode is not illumined, by any light, as an example. That abode is referring to his own, and also even the Vaikuntha planets.
Yeah, so it's easy to connect us to Vaikuntha planet. When Krishna say my abode, okay, it's Vaikuntha planet. But particularly Goloka Vrindavan, that link is basically within Bhagavad Gita, it is not established.
Yeah, he hasn't directly referenced it, Goloka Vrindavan, like we see in Brahma Samhita or Srimad Bhagavatam, but he has said my abode. So my abode refers to the Supreme Krishna Loka. Right? Because he's saying worship me. Not worship me in my forearm form. He's saying worship me. So when you worship Krishna, because Krishna is only present in Goloka Vrindavan. He is not present in his two-arm form in Vaikuntha. Right? He's not present there. That's why we saw in Nectar of Instruction why this Vrindavan in the material world is even superior than Vaikuntha. Because Krishna himself has come and stepped foot in this Vrindavan, Bhumi Vrindavan. But in Vaikuntha he doesn't. So when he says my abode, me, that is directly referring to Goloka Vrindavan, Krishna Loka. But of course, he has not directly described it with the word, but we understand how he is speaking. It's okay? Hare Krishna, thank you. Dhanyavad. Hare Krishna, Hare.
I just had a question.
Yes.
Is the worship of demigods considered like a personal worship, or would that be
No.
some part of personal worship?
No, it's not.
Somebody worshiping Shiva or any other like Ganesh or
Yeah.
that.
So demigod worship is not an impersonal worship, it's an indirect worship of Krishna. But they're worshiping a person, but not the Supreme Lord. They are worshiping an empowered devotee of the Supreme Lord. But Krishna has already clearly established, chapter 7, chapter 9, that this is not the right path. He said, goes as much as say, one whose intelligence has been stolen would worship accordingly. So he's already established that as not the recommended path. Here he's establishing even the worship of my impersonal feature is not recommended. Right? By the end of this, if we don't have a clue where we should worship, we are in maybe less hope. Just keep reading. Because Krishna has made it so crystal clear. And so Prabhupada writes in the purport in this section that, commentators who have some objective, some agenda, obfuscate the truth, the reality. But if you just take it as it is, it's so clear. What is the best, highest of all, and most perfect and easiest? But that's why it requires some faith. Anything else? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Anugram Prabhuji, all praise to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
I have, I think two questions. First is, first is a clarification actually, just clarifying because it always gets confused with this impersonal concept. So basically two kinds of impersonalists are the first kind are the ones who out of ignorance are not knowing about the personal feature, so they are actually only worshipping the impersonal form. That's one. And the second kind are those Mayavadis who are actually aware of the personal form as well, and they deny their existence, and so they can club along with the beast. Is that my clear understanding of the impersonalists, first of all?
Yeah, the only, yes, you have it right. The only slight modification I would make to that statement is that they're not necessarily aware of the personal feature, but what they deny the personal feature. So because they say it doesn't exist. So in their mind, they would say they're not aware of it. They would say, no, there is no form of the Lord. He assumes a form when he descends to the material world. So when the people are like, well, wait a minute, he spoke Bhagavad Gita. How can you say Krishna is a form? Yeah, that's a temporary form. That form is Maya. He says, when God descends into the material world, he is forced to accept a form. That is the philosophy of the Mayavadi. But otherwise, there is no personal feature. In the liberated state, he is impersonal. And again, there is an agenda to that philosophy. The agenda is, the motive is, they want to become God. And thus it's very offensive. So we don't say that they're aware of the feature of the Lord, of personal feature. We say that they deny that there is a personal form of the Lord eternally. They'll accept that Krishna performed even his pastimes on Goloka Vrindavan, in Vrindavan. They'll accept he spoke Bhagavad Gita. But they'll say that form is temporary. In the liberated state, he is impersonal.
Yeah, I think I get that. Now when we talk about atheists who do not believe in God at all, so will that be classed as a third category then?
Yeah, so there are the atheists who deny all aspects of God. But this Mayavadi philosophy is also atheistic because it's denying the ultimate feature of God. Because again, they want to become God. So why is Mayavadi considered atheistic? Because it says, I am God. Well, that then is not believing in the Supreme Lord. They're not saying Supreme Lord is there. They're saying, no, I am God. In my liberated state, I am God. So then I don't believe in God. So it's also atheistic. Both are atheistic. Is that clear? Or?
Yeah, crystal clear. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Good questions.
I keep forgetting all the time. For reminding us. Wonderful class. Thank you so much. One more question I have is like not a question you have. I know you said it 100 times before, and I still don't understand. You talked about the faith. Faith is that faith in two aspects. Faith that the Krishna consciousness process is the only path that can lead to perfection. And second is Krishna is my only object of worship. Correct? And something else you mentioned.
And that his mercy is coming. He'll help us. We should have great faith and confidence in that his mercy is coming. So, that is where our faith should be fixed.
Sure, that's I get it now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dandavats. This is, it's good we have this discussion because, just clarifying the little bit, the distinctions between the atheistic view, the innocent view, so that we don't lump everything into one bucket, one category, is very important. Because, again, this impersonalist worship in the atheistic view is very dangerous for us. Even a drop of that philosophy, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, can ruin everything. That is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself's statement. A drop of that can ruin everything. But we should also keep some accommodation or understanding that there may be, some are yet developing their understanding of Krishna and have come to the impersonal view at this point. So we should, distinguish between the innocent and the atheist. So thanks for these questions because it helps us, or allows us to engage a little bit of more deep dialogue on this to distinguish between the two. And every time we discuss this section of verses, we have the opportunity to draw that distinction and clarification. And as we say, if we hear it a few times, it helps to solidify it in our consciousness, so we understand it clearly. Any other comments? Yeah.
Yeah, as a follow-up question, I was thinking that, in tangible terms, if you can mention any further examples for the first category of those impersonalists who out of ignorance are like, they kind of worshipping only the impersonal supreme, and not the out of ignorance, they're not aware, those kinds.
Yeah, Shukadev Goswami.
Oh.
Right? He was an impersonalist until it was revealed to him in his heart. by the great mercy. Right? The four Kumaras, another very famous example. So much so they became the acharya of one of the authorized sampradayas in bhakti, Vaishnavism. So those are two examples we often refer to. There are others, but those are two that we often refer to, where one can progress to the highest state.
Thank you, Prabhuji. That now is so clear. Thank you so much. And
Hey.
thank you so much. Swarna Hari Prabhu also for bringing out this question
Yeah,
for our clarification. Thank you so much.
I'm very grateful that we had those questions come, because it's important for us to understand and apply correctly. Any other discussion? Okay. So if not, next week we'll continue reading chapter 12. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Hare Krishna, everyone.